She crowned herself Malaysia's First Lady, even though the title doesn't exist. She lived like a queen. 567 handbags, 423 watches, 12,000 pieces of jewelry. Some of it funded by money meant for school children. Convicted in 2022, she still walked free. Then, in September 2025, her luck cracked. The Court of Appeal shut down her latest bid to escape prison. So what did she do to earn the title of Malaysia's most hated woman? This is Rosmah Mansor, the untouchable who stole from a nation. The ballroom lights glared as dignitaries entered the hall. But it wasn't Najib Razak, the new prime minister, who stole the spotlight. It was his wife. Rosmah Mansor swept in draped in couture, towering hair catching every camera flash. Ambassadors bowed, and whispers spread. Who was really running the country? Rosmah already had her answer. "I am the First Lady of Malaysia," she declared, even though no such title exists in the Constitution. And she wasn't joking. Soon, the Prime Minister's department quietly listed a new division on its website, FLOM, the First Lady of Malaysia office. It had staff, letterhead, and funding. Taxpayers were now supporting a role that didn't legally exist. The audacity was breathtaking. While past prime ministers' wives remained in the background, Rosmah demanded protocol, usually reserved for heads of state. She built the image of a monarch, an entourage, motorcades, and protocol that made her impossible to ignore. Malaysians saw a woman who had crowned herself. But what they didn't yet see was how far her influence would reach behind the scenes. Behind closed doors, Rosmah's ambitions grew even sharper. If the FLOM office was her stage, the corridors of power became her kingdom. Cabinet ministers learned the hard way. It wasn't always Najib who had the final word. More and more, decisions were funneled through his wife. One former aide described the ritual. Senior officials waiting outside her chamber with dossiers, their futures hanging on her approval. A nod from Rosmah could move a contract forward. A frown could kill it overnight. They gave her a nickname, the real Prime Minister. Her reach was undeniable. Cabinet appointments shuffled at her urging. Foreign negotiations paused until she weighed in. Allies rewarded, rivals sidelined. Even seasoned politicians admitted, if you wanted Najib, you had to go through Rosmah first. This wasn't a show of titles or protocol. It was something far more dangerous. Rosmah had turned her proximity to the prime minister into unchecked political power. Unelected, unaccountable, but absolute. And once she mastered influence, the next step was inevitable. Finding ways to turn that power into money. While ordinary Malaysians tightened their belts, Rosmah Mansor redefined indulgence. Private jets ferried her to New York, Paris, and Dubai. Five-star suites hosted her entourages. Security details shadowed her every step. Bills that could fund small hospitals were instead swallowed by her shopping sprees. But one jewel would come to symbolize her greed above all others. The pink diamond, a 22-carat masterpiece worth $27 million. U.S. investigators allege it was bought with money siphoned from one MDB. The contrast was devastating. International media branded her Malaysia's Imelda Marcos, a comparison Malaysians quickly embraced on social media. Posts mocked her excess. While we count ringgit at the grocery store, she counts millions in US dollars at jewelry stores. To the world, Rosmah's luxury was a spectacle. To Malaysians, it was something far worse. Proof that she believed herself untouchable. But what happens when a nation that's struggling to get by sees its leaders flaunting wealth this obscene? By the mid-2000s, anger was boiling over. Najib's government had introduced the GST, a nationwide sales tax on goods and services that made everything more expensive overnight. It was so despised that it would later be scrapped. But in those years, it bled ordinary Malaysians dry. At the Pasar Malam, families counted every ringgit, stretching their budgets thinner each week. Parents skipped meals so their children could eat. Young graduates joked grimly about never affording a home. And then came the images. Rosmah stepping off private jets. Rosmah surrounded by Birkins. Rosmah dripping in jewels. The fury exploded online. Memes spread like wildfire, comparing her to Imelda Marcos. WhatsApp chains joked that her pink diamond alone could electrify Sarawak's schools. Her towering hair became a national punchline. She was no longer just Najib's wife. She had become Malaysia's most hated woman, a liability so toxic that she threatened to sink her husband's dynasty. And Malaysians were about to discover that the mockery wasn't enough. Because behind the handbags and headlines lay something far darker, a scheme that stole directly from their children. In rural Sarawak, classrooms often went dark when the diesel generators failed. Students sat in the heat, and teachers struggled to keep lessons going without reliable electricity. For years, these schools in the interior begged for a permanent solution. Then came a promise: a 1 billion ringgit solar project, bringing power to 369 rural schools. On paper, it looked compassionate. In reality, it became one of Malaysia's most brazen scams. Prosecutors said companies had to pay massive kickbacks just to win contracts, inflating costs by hundreds of millions. And at the center of it all was Rosmah Mansor. Rizal Mansor, her former aide, no relation to Rosmah, testified she demanded up to a 15% cut on government projects. For the solar deal alone, that meant tens of millions flowing at her direction. The results were devastating. Overpriced panels, delays, equipment that barely worked. Schools that had waited years for reliable power were left with systems that failed to deliver. Court testimony laid bare the meetings, the demands, the transfers, later echoed in a leaked draft judgment that fueled years of appeals. The evidence was overwhelming. The woman who lived like royalty was literally stealing from schoolchildren. But investigators were about to uncover something even bigger: a global scandal that made millions look like pocket change. While Rosmah was siphoning millions from schoolchildren, an even bigger scheme was unfolding, one that would drag Malaysia's name into global headlines. 1MDB, Malaysia's sovereign wealth fund, was created to spark development and prosperity. Instead, investigators say it became a personal piggy bank. The U.S. Department of Justice alleged more than $4.5 billion was siphoned away, one of the largest financial frauds in history. At the center of the heist was a young financier named Joe Low. He wasn't a government official, but he had access, charm, and a network of shell companies that moved billions across the world. He lived like a movie mogul: yachts in the Mediterranean, parties with Leonardo DiCaprio, even funding Hollywood blockbusters like The Wolf of Wall Street. But Joe Low didn't move billions alone. The U.S. Department of Justice filings pointed to someone higher, codenamed Malaysian Official 1. The world understood this to be Najib Razak, Malaysia's sitting prime minister. And the money trail didn't stop with him. Investigators say it reached his wife, Rosmah Mansor, in the form of luxury handbags, jewels, and one symbol above all: a 22-carat pink diamond necklace worth $27 million. For investigators, it was the perfect symbol of excess. For Malaysians, it was proof that their leaders' greed had reached the highest level of power, all while ordinary families paid the price. The fallout was global. Switzerland froze assets. Singapore filed charges. The U.S. pursued forfeiture cases to claw back billions. And Joe Low? He vanished, slipping into hiding under the protection of powerful friends. If you want to know where he is now, we've covered that in another video on this channel. Through it all, Rosmah denied any role. She claimed ignorance, insisting she knew nothing of 1MDB. But financial trails and witness testimony told a different story. The walls were closing in, and Rosmah Mansor was about to face a reckoning. Not from Washington or Singapore, but from her own people. May 9th, 2018, election night in Malaysia. For the first time since independence, the ruling party fell. At the age of 92, Mahathir Mohamad returned from retirement and led the opposition to a stunning victory. For Najib Razak and Rosmah Mansor, it was the end of an era and the beginning of a reckoning. Within hours, both were barred from leaving the country. The new government made it clear there would be no escape, no exile, no comfortable retirement funded by stolen billions. Then came the raids. Police swept through their luxury properties, hauling out evidence in front of the cameras. Malaysians watched in disbelief as the numbers piled up: 567 handbags, 423 watches, and 12,000 pieces of jewelry. Cash in 26 different currencies. The total haul, more than $250 million, made it the largest seizure in Malaysia's history. The trials followed. Najib was the first to fall. In 2020, he was convicted on 7 charges tied to SRC International, a 1MDB subsidiary. His 12-year sentence was upheld in 2022, and Malaysia's former prime minister was led away in disgrace. Prisoner number 87. But even in prison, Najib kept fighting. A 2024 royal pardon halved his sentence, and in 2025, he pushed for house arrest under a disputed royal addendum the government insists doesn't exist. Some charges were even dropped on procedural grounds. For Malaysians, it was proof the dynasty still knew how to bend the rules. But if Najib could keep testing the limits of justice from behind bars, what about Rosmah? She faced her own day in court. In September 2022, she was convicted in the solar schools scandal and sentenced to 10 years in prison. But she bought herself time with multiple appeals and applications, remaining free while the case wound through Malaysia's courts. That time appeared to finally run out in September 2025. The Court of Appeal dismissed her bid to challenge the trial judge. Her conviction stood. And while her lawyers may still fight on, the walls are closing in. The woman who once lived like royalty now faces the reality of life as a prisoner. The dynasty had fallen, but the scars Rosmah left on Malaysia were only beginning to be counted. Today, Rosmah Mansor's empire lies in ruins. The Hermes handbags sit in evidence rooms. The seized jewelry gathers dust in government vaults. And the infamous $27 million pink diamond, once meant to symbolize untouchable power, has never been returned to Malaysians. Najib Razak, once Malaysia's most powerful man, now prisoner number 87, saw his 12-year sentence halved by a royal pardon, though he remains behind bars while fighting for house arrest. Rosmah, meanwhile, saw her latest appeal dismissed, her 10-year prison term confirmed. The woman who once styled herself as Malaysia's first lady now stands as a cautionary tale. Not of royalty, but of betrayal. But the damage they caused cannot be measured in handbags or diamonds. It's in the schools of Sarawak, where children once studied in darkness because their future was stolen. It's in the trust of millions of Malaysians, broken by the leaders who claimed to serve them. Rosmah crowned herself Malaysia's first lady. History will remember her only as the face of its greatest shame. The untouchable had finally been touched by justice, at least for now. And if you want to know where Joe Low is hiding right now, click here to watch our full investigation. If you thought Rosmah's story was shocking, wait until you see our investigation into the billionaire who built a retail empire while protecting Jeffrey Epstein. That story is next. I'm John, and this is Silk Street, where power rises and betrayal brings it crashing down.